old farm tradition.
The will reading happened on a Wednesday afternoon in July 1975. Robert Carson had died the previous Sunday at age 74, had farmed 720 acres in Grundy County, Iowa since 1928, 47 years of working the same land. His 4 children sat in lawyer Martin Fletcher's office in Grundy Center, waiting to hear how their father had divided what he'd built. 3 sons, James, age 48, had worked alongside his father since 1952, 23 years of farming the home place. Michael, age 45, had bought and farmed neighboring land starting in 1955, helped his father during busy seasons. David, age 42, had moved to Des Moines in 1960 for an accounting job, visited regularly, always said he'd come back to farm someday. One daughter, Sarah, age 39, had never left Grundy County, lived in a small house in town, worked as a bookkeeper at the co-op, but spent every weekend and every evening helping her father with whatever he needed. Farm records, equipment maintenance, field scouting, grain marketing. Sarah knew that farm as well as her brothers, better than David, who'd been gone 15 years. Martin Fletcher, age 67, had been Robert's lawyer since 1951. He opened the will, adjusted his reading glasses, read through the standard legal language about sound mind and final wishes, then got to the distribution of assets. To my son, James Carson, I leave 240 acres, specifically the North Quarter section, including the home place, all buildings and all improvements thereon. James nodded, expected. He'd been the one farming with Dad the longest. Made sense he'd get the home quarter. To my son, Michael Carson, I leave 240 acres, specifically the East Quarter section. Michael smiled. Fair distribution. Good ground, flat and well drained. To my son, David Carson, I leave 240 acres, specifically the South Quarter section. David looked surprised but pleased. He'd get his chance to come back and farm after all. Maybe quit that accounting job, move home. Martin paused. Looked at Sarah, the only daughter. To my daughter, Sarah Carson, I leave my 1958 Farmall H tractor, serial number FBH 35847, free and clear of all encumbrances. Silence in the room. Heavy, uncomfortable silence. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Her 3 brothers got 240 acres each, 720 acres total, worth approximately $900,000 at 1975 land prices of $1,250 per acre. She got a 17-year-old tractor worth maybe $3,500 if she could find a buyer. James spoke first, confusion in his voice. That's it? Sarah gets a tractor? Just the tractor? Martin checked the will again, though he'd read it correctly the first time. That's what the document states. The land is divided equally among the 3 sons, 240 acres to each. Sarah receives the 1958 Farmall H tractor. David laughed, not cruelly, just in genuine surprise at the absurdity. Dad left you a tractor, an old tractor that's probably older than your car. Michael looked uncomfortable. Sarah, that's not fair. You should get something more. Maybe we can work something out among the 4 of us. No. Sarah's voice was quiet, but absolutely firm. The will is the will. Dad made his decision. He had his reasons. What reasons? James said. You helped him as much as any of us. More than David, who's been in Des Moines for 15 years. Dad was old-fashioned, Sarah said. He believed farms should pass to sons. That's how he was raised. That's how his father did it. I knew this was coming. After the meeting in the parking lot outside Martin's office, James tried to be diplomatic. Sarah, look, this isn't right. But you know how Dad was. Traditional. Believed land should stay with the men who farm it. He didn't mean it as an insult to you. I know what he meant. Sarah's tone was neutral, hard to read. He meant, I'm a woman, and women don't farm, and therefore I don't need land. I get the tractor as a token. Something to remember him by. It's a good tractor, David offered weakly, then immediately realized how stupid that sounded given the circumstances. Michael said, "We should figure out some kind of cash payment. Pool together, give you something more equitable. You deserve more than a tractor." "I don't want your charity," Sarah said flatly. "I'll make do with what I got." She drove home to her small two-bedroom house in Grundy Center, sat at her kitchen table and looked at the one piece of paper that represented her inheritance, the title to a 1958 Farmall H tractor, 17 years old, probably 8,000 hours on it, faded red paint, worn seat, reliable engine if maintained properly. Her brothers had gotten an empire. She'd gotten a machine. Sarah could have been angry, could have contested the will, claimed the distribution was inequitable, could have demanded at least cash value of 1/4 of the estate. Lawyers would have taken the case. She might have won. But Sarah understood something about her father, about farming, about herself. Anger wouldn't grow crops, resentment wouldn't buy land, and starting a fight with her brothers would poison the only family she had left. More importantly, Sarah understood something her brothers didn't seem to grasp. Land without the ability to farm it profitably was just expensive dirt. And a tractor, if you had the knowledge and determination, was opportunity. Sarah had learned to farm alongside her father for 20 years. While her brothers focused on driving tractors and running equipment, Sarah had learned the complete operation. Equipment maintenance. She could rebuild a carburetor, replace hydraulic seals, diagnose electrical problems. Bookkeeping. She knew cost per acre, break-even yields, profit margins. Crop marketing. She'd been helping her father sell grain for a decade, knew basis, futures, options. Soil management. She could read soil tests, calculate fertilizer needs, identify deficiencies in the field. She knew farming as well as her brothers. Better than David, who'd been doing accounting in Des Moines for 15 years. She just didn't have land, but she had a tractor and a plan. Within 1 week of the will reading, Sarah started executing. She drove around Grundy County, visiting farms where she knew the owners were getting older, were tired of the physical work, were thinking about retirement but didn't want to sell. Her first stop, Herman Mueller, age 72, who owned 80 acres adjacent to what had been her father's land. Herman was widowed, had no children interested in farming, was getting too old to handle the work himself. "Herman, I want to rent your ground. Cash rent, fair rate. I've got a tractor, I know how to farm. You get steady income without the work, I get land to work." Herman looked skeptical. "Sarah, you're a woman. Can you handle 80 acres? I helped my dad farm 720 acres for 20 years. I can handle 80. What's your offer?" $85 per acre. That's $6,800 total, above market rate, Herman considered. The going rate was $75, $80 per acre. Sarah was offering premium. "You got equipment besides that old Farmall? I'll make do. I'm not asking you to provide equipment. Just land. Deal. We'll do 1 year, see how it goes." Second stop. Arthur Jensen, age 69, owned 80 acres southwest of town. Arthur had heart problems. Doctor had told him to slow down. "Arthur, I need land to rent. Cash rent, $85 per acre. You get guaranteed money, I do all the work." Arthur knew Sarah, knew she was capable. "Your brothers know you're doing this. This isn't their business." "Fair enough. 80 acres at 85 is $6,800. Let's try it." By the end of July 1975, 2 weeks after inheriting just a tractor, Sarah had rented 160 acres. Would cost her $13,600 in rent. She needed operating capital for seed, fertilizer, chemicals, fuel. She went to Grundy National Bank, met with loan officer Roger Patterson. "Roger, I need an operating loan, $18,000, for farming." Roger looked at the application. "Sarah, you don't own any land. What's your collateral?" "My house. I own it free and clear, worth $25,000. I'll use it as collateral." "You're going to risk your house to farm rented ground?" "Yes." That's extremely risky. If the crop fails, you lose everything. I understand the risk. Will you make the loan? Roger approved it. $18,000 at 9.5% interest. Sarah signed the papers, took the money, immediately started buying inputs. Her brothers heard about it within days. Small town, word travels fast. James called her. Sarah, what the hell are you doing? You're going into debt to rent ground? You're risking your house? That's insane. Why don't you just get a better job? Sell the tractor for what it's worth. Invest that money safely. I am investing it in farming. You don't have land. I have 160 acres rented. That's more than most beginning farmers start with. But it's not yours. You're paying rent. You're paying interest. You'll go broke. Maybe. We'll see. James couldn't comprehend it. Neither could Michael or David. They had land handed to them, free and clear, worth $240,000 each. The idea of starting with nothing, taking on debt and risk, voluntarily entering that kind of pressure, they couldn't understand it. Sarah farmed her 160 rented acres in 1976, did absolutely everything herself. Spring fieldwork, plowed, disked, planted, summer, scouted, sprayed when needed, cultivated, fall, harvested, hauled to elevator, handled all marketing. The 1958 Farmall H wasn't big, 40 horsepower, no cab, just an umbrella for shade. Old, slow, basic, but it was paid for. That was the key. No equipment payment meant lower fixed costs, meant she could survive on thinner margins than farmers with debt. She grossed $4,300 from 160 acres at 228 corn and 133 bushel average. After rent, $13,600, seed, $2,400, fertilizer, $2,800, chemicals, Sun 100, fuel, $900, loan interest, $1,710, and other costs, $590. She netted $7,200. Not much, barely enough to live on. But profit, real profit. She saved $6,000, kept $1,200 for living expenses, and ate cheaply. Her brothers, meanwhile, were farming their inherited land. James farmed his 240 acres. Had the home place, good buildings but needed equipment. His father's other equipment had been sold to settle estate expenses. James borrowed $45,000 in early 1976 to buy a newer tractor, a planter, and implements. Loan at 10.2% over 7 years. Monthly payment $780, annual debt service $9,360. Michael farmed his 240 acres, had some equipment but needed grain handling capacity, borrowed $38,000 for a grain dryer and storage bins. Payment $660 per month, $7,920 annually. David quit his accounting job, moved back to Grundy Center with his wife and 2 kids, started farming his inherited 240 acres. Problem, he'd been gone 15 years, owned 0 equipment, borrowed $67,000 for a used tractor, planter, sprayer, and basic implements. Payment $1,160 per month, $30,920 annually. By end of 1976, the 3 brothers had combined equipment debt of $150,000. Combined annual debt service, $31,200. They were grossing more than Sarah, each farming 240 acres versus her 160, but their debt service was eating their profits. James grossed about $42,000, paid $9,360 in equipment debt, netted maybe $22,000 after all costs, felt successful. Bought a new pickup truck. Michael grossed about $38,000, paid $7,920 in equipment debt, netted maybe $20,000, built a pole barn for $8,000. David grossed about $40,000, paid $13,920 in equipment debt, netted maybe $15,000. Barely enough for his family to live on, but he was farming, living the dream. None of them were saving, they were spending. They felt successful because they owned land. Sarah, with her rented ground and paid-for tractor, was saving. 1977 and 1978 were decent years. Corn prices stayed in the $225–250 range. Sarah grossed $27,000, $29,000 from her 160 acres, netted $9,000, $2,500 after all costs, saved aggressively. By end of 1978, she had $24,500 saved. Her brothers had good years too, but their spending absorbed their profits. New vehicles, home improvements, vacations. They looked successful. Sarah, living in her small house and driving a 10-year-old car, looked poor. Then 1979 arrived, and agricultural economics started shifting. Interest rates began climbing as the Federal Reserve fought inflation. Corn prices stayed okay, $2.52 in 1979. But there was unease in farm country. Things felt less certain. 1980 was the peak. Corn hit $3.15. Land values hit record highs, but interest rates were at 13% and climbing. The boom felt unsustainable. Sarah had a great year in 1980. Grossed $35,200 from 160 acres. After all costs, including rising rent, $15,200 now, netted $12,800. Her total savings hit $39,000. Her brothers had great gross years too, but rising interest rates meant their variable rate equipment loans were adjusting upward. Their payments were increasing. Then 1981 arrived and everything collapsed. Interest rates hit 21.5%. The grain embargo devastated exports. Corn prices fell from $3.15 to $2.60 to $2.25 over the course of the year. Land values stopped climbing and started falling. Sarah's 1981 season, gross of $28,400, rent still $15,200, other costs about the same. Netted $7,100. Her income dropped, but she had no debt. She survived. Her brothers were in crisis. James's gross income fell from $52,000 to $40,000. But his equipment debt service had increased with rising rates, now paying $11,400 annually. His net dropped from $28,000 to maybe $15,000. Manageable but scary. Michael's gross fell from $47,000 to $36,000. His debt service hit $9,200. Net, maybe $14,000. Getting tight. David's situation was worst. Gross fell from $50,000 to $38,000. His debt service was now $60,100 with rate adjustments. His net was maybe $9,000 for a family of four. Not sustainable. 1982 was worse. Corn fell to $2.20. All three brothers were losing money. Sarah was barely breaking even, but still surviving. 1983, corn at $2.10, the full crisis. Farmers foreclosing everywhere. David was first to go. By spring 1984, he'd missed 6 months of equipment payments. The bank started foreclosure proceedings. His 240 acres went to auction in August 1984. Sarah attended the auction, watched David's land, the land her father had left him just 9 years earlier, sell for $740 per acre, $176,600 total. After the bank took what David owed them for equipment and operating loans, David walked away with maybe $32,000. Land he'd inherited worth $300,000 netted him $32,000 after 9 years. David moved back to Des Moines, got an accounting job, never farmed again. His wife never forgave him for the failed experiment. Michael lasted until 1986. Finally foreclosed after 3 years of losses. His 240 acres sold at auction for $680 per acre, $163,200. After debt satisfaction, Michael got maybe $18,000. He moved to Marshalltown, got a job at a hardware store. James held on longest, made it to 1988, sold off equipment trying to stay afloat, finally foreclosed. His 240 acres, the home place, sold for $720 per acre, $172,800. After the bank took their share, James got $24,000. He moved to Waterloo, got a factory supervisor job. By 1988, 13 years after inheriting 240 acres each, all three brothers had lost everything. 720 acres that had passed to them debt-free was gone, sold to pay banks. The brothers had nothing except the small amounts they'd walked away with from auctions. Sarah, who'd inherited only a $3,500 tractor, was still farming, still renting Herman Muller's 80 acres and Arthur Jensen's 80 acres, still making small profits with her paid-for equipment and minimal overhead, and she was accumulating capital. By 1987, she had $58,000 saved. Land prices had bottomed. Opportunities were appearing. In 1987, a neighbor 160 acres came up for sale, an estate sale. Farmer had died, widow was moving to town. Land was being offered at $850 per acre, $136,000 total. Sarah had $58,000 cash. She made an offer, $850 per acre, $58,000 down, financed the remaining $78,000 at 11.8% over 15 years. Monthly payment, 9 on 10s, risky, a payment for the first time. But land was cheap, she had cash for a strong down payment, and she believed values would recover. Offer accepted. Sarah bought her first 160 acres in September 1987. Now she owned 160 acres and rented another 160 acres. Farming 320 acres total with her 1958 Farmall H that her father had left her 12 years earlier. The tractor was 29 years old by then, showing its age. But Sarah maintained it religiously. Oil changes every 80 hours, grease fittings every use. When something wore out, she replaced it immediately. Through the early 1990s, Sarah farmed her 320 acres and made payments on her 160-acre loan. Prices recovered slowly. By 1992, her land was worth about $1,050 per acre, $168,000. She owed $58,000 on it. Equity, $110,000. In 1992, opportunity knocked. Michael's former 240 acres, part of her father's original farm, came back on market. The farmer who'd bought it at auction in 1986 was getting old, needed to sell, asking $100 per acre, $264,000 total. Sarah had $82,000 in savings, plus $110,000 equity. She could make an aggressive offer. She bid $1,050 per acre, $252,000 total, put down $82,000 cash, financed $170,000 at 8.2% over 20 years. Payment, 1,450 sittings per month. High payment. But now she owned 400 acres, starting to build an empire from a tractor inheritance. By 1998, she'd paid off the original 160 acres completely, owned them free and clear. Just had the payment on the 240 acres Michael had lost. Prices were recovering. Land was hitting $1,600, $1,700 per acre. Sarah's 400 acres were worth about $660,000. She owed maybe $135,000. Equity, $525,000. In 2001, James's former 240 acres became available. The family who'd bought them at his foreclosure auction was selling to retire. Offered to Sarah first, knowing the land's history. $1,650 per acre, $396,000 total. Sarah had $195,000 saved. Put that down, financed $201,000. Now she owned 640 acres. The entire 720 acres her father had farmed, minus the 80 acres David's land, had eventually been split and sold off to multiple buyers. By 2005, Sarah owned 640 acres with about $285,000 remaining debt. Land values were climbing toward $3,000 per acre. Her net worth was approaching $1.6 million. She farmed until 2018, when she was 82 years old, 43 years after inheriting just a tractor. Sold all 640 acres in spring 2018 for $4,200 per acre, $12,688,000 total. After paying off remaining debt and capital gains taxes, netted approximately $2.1 million. The three brothers, who'd each inherited 240 acres worth $300,000 in 1975. James worked as a factory supervisor at John Deere in Waterloo until retiring in 2008. Lived on Social Security and a small pension. Died in 2015 at age 88 with approximately $23,000 in savings. Michael worked at Ericsson Hardware in Marshalltown until 2014. Retired poor. lived on Social Security, died in 2019 at age 89 with $8,000 in savings. David worked various accounting jobs in Des Moines until retiring in 2010. Still alive in 2024 at age 91, living in an assisted living facility, costs covered by Medicaid. Sarah, who inherited only a $3,500 tractor, retired with $2.1 million, still alive and healthy at age 88 in 2024, living comfortably in her own home in Grundy Center. At a family reunion in summer 2023, David's son asked Sarah about the inheritance. The story had become family legend. "Aunt Sarah, weren't you mad that Grandpa only left you the tractor while Dad and Uncle James and Uncle Michael got all the land?" Sarah, now 87, smiled at the question she'd been asked dozens of times over the decades. "At first, yes, I was furious. Felt like my father had valued his sons over his daughter. Felt like 20 years of helping him counted for nothing. But then I realized something. Your grandfather actually gave me the most valuable thing. He gave me motivation." "What do you mean?" "Your dad and uncles got land handed to them, free and clear. They thought they'd won. But inheriting wealth without earning it doesn't teach you how to keep it. They borrowed against those farms, spent the equity, made bad decisions because they thought the land would always be there. I got a tractor, just a machine. But that meant I had to build everything myself. Had to be careful, disciplined, smart, couldn't afford mistakes." She paused. "Your grandfather taught me something without meaning to. Ownership without wisdom is temporary. Your dad and uncles owned land, but didn't understand how to keep it. They started with everything and ended with nothing. I started with nothing and ended with everything." "Do you think Grandpa knew that would happen?" Sarah laughed. "No. He thought I'd sell the tractor, use the money as a nest egg, marry somebody, let a man take care of me. That's how men his age thought. But he was wrong about women, wrong about me, and his mistake ended up being my opportunity." 3 brothers split the farm equally, 720 acres divided among 3 sons. The daughter got just the old tractor. 48 years later, only the daughter still farms. Only she succeeded. Only she kept what their father built. Sometimes the worst inheritance is the best teacher. Sometimes starting with nothing makes you stronger than starting with everything. Sometimes the daughter everyone underestimated becomes the only one who understands how to build an empire from a single machine. But the full story of how Sarah Carson went from inheriting a tractor to owning 640 acres requires understanding the years between, the struggles, the doubts, the moments when it seemed her brothers had been right and she'd been foolish. The first winter after renting the ground, 1975 to 76, Sarah faced a crisis of confidence. She'd committed to $13,600 in rent and $18,000 in operating loans. That was $31,600 she needed to generate from 160 acres she didn't own. If the crop failed, if prices crashed, if anything went wrong, she'd lose her house. Her brothers, farming their inherited land, had no such pressure. They owned their ground. If they had a bad year, they'd still have the land. Sarah had only debt and risk. She spent that winter in her shed, maintaining the 1958 Farmall H. The tractor was 17 years old, had about 200 hours on it. She changed all the fluids, replaced worn belts, rebuilt the carburetor, adjusted the valves, painted touch-up spots where rust was forming. Her brother James stopped by one evening in February, found her in the shed working on the tractor. "Sarah, it's 20 degrees out here. What are you doing?" "Making sure this tractor is ready for spring." James looked around the shed. Small, unheated, barely room for the tractor and a workbench. "You could work on equipment in my shop. It's heated, got better tools." "I'm fine here." "Sarah," James hesitated. "Are you sure about this farming thing? It's not too late to back out. Sell the tractor, get a better job, live safer." "I'm not backing out. But you're risking everything. Your house, your savings." For what? To farm rented ground with an old tractor? Yes. James shook his head. I don't understand you. I know you don't. What James didn't understand was that Sarah had nothing to fall back on. Her brothers had land. If farming didn't work out, they could sell and have hundreds of thousands of dollars. Sarah had a house worth $25,000 and a tractor worth $3,500. If she didn't make farming work, she'd have nothing. That desperation was her advantage. She couldn't afford to be complacent, couldn't afford mistakes, had to be perfect in a way her brothers never had to be. Spring 1976, Sarah planted her 160 rented acres. Took her 3 weeks. Her brothers, with bigger modern tractors, finished their 240 acres each in 10 to 12 days. Sarah was slower, but she was thorough. Checked seed depth constantly, maintained precise spacing, took pride in straight rows. Summer 1976, she scouted fields twice a week, found problems early, spent $1,800 on herbicides and insecticides, more than she'd budgeted, but necessary. Her brothers spent half that per acre because they scouted less frequently, missed early infestations, lost yield. Fall 1976, she harvested carefully, adjusted combine settings constantly to minimize loss. Her brothers rushed, lost 3 to 4 bushels per acre to improper settings. Sarah lost maybe 1 bushel per acre. On 160 acres, that difference was 320, 480 bushels. At 228, that was $730, $1,094 Sarah saved through care. Every little advantage mattered when you were starting with nothing. Her $7,200 net profit that first year felt like a fortune. She celebrated by buying herself a new pair of work boots, her first new purchase in 2 years. Saved the rest. Year 2, 1977, brought a new challenge. Hermann Müller's daughter wanted him to rent his ground to someone else, someone with newer equipment. Sarah, you're doing fine, Hermann told her in March 1977, but my daughter Ruth thinks I should rent to someone with modern equipment. Says you're taking too long to plant and harvest, might cost me yield. Sarah felt panic. If she lost Hermann's 80 acres, she'd only have Arthur Jensen's 80. Would that be enough? Hermann, what were your yields last year? 143 bushels per acre. What did your neighbor average? The one with the brand new 4630? Hermann thought. About 138. I gave you 5 more bushels per acre than the guy with the new tractor, because I took time to do it right. Modern equipment is faster, careful farming is better. Hermann kept her as a renter, but it reminded Sarah how precarious her position was. She didn't own the land, could lose it any time. That vulnerability drove her. By 1978, she had $24,500 saved. Not enough to buy land yet. Prices were $250 per acre. 80 acres would cost $100,000, but building toward it. Her brothers, meanwhile, were feeling successful. James bought a new Chevy Silverado in 1978, $7,200. Michael built a deck on his house, $3,500. David took his family on vacation to Colorado, $2,800. They could afford these things because they owned land worth $240,000 each, felt rich, didn't realize they were spending equity. When 1981 hit and the crisis started, the different approaches became stark. Sarah's fixed costs were minimal: rent, operating inputs, a small life insurance policy, total fixed annual costs, maybe $20,000. If her gross income fell, she could scale back personal spending, delay equipment maintenance, survive. Her brothers had fixed costs they couldn't reduce: equipment payments, property taxes on 240 acres, building insurance, vehicle payments. James's fixed costs were probably $15,000 annually, Michael's $13,000, David's $18,000. When gross incomes fell from $50,000 to $38,000, Sarah could adjust. Her brothers couldn't. Sarah watched James struggle in 1982-83. He stopped by her house one evening in October 1982, looked exhausted. "Sarah, can I ask you something? How are you making it?" "Barely. But I have no debt payments, that's the difference. I'm paying $9,000 in equipment payments. Can't stop, can't reduce. I'm $10,000 short this year. Next year looks worse. Can you sell the equipment? Discharge the debt? And farm with what? I need equipment to generate the income to pay for the equipment. It's a cycle. It's a trap, Sarah said quietly. Yeah. James looked at her. You were smart. I thought you were crazy, but you were smart. By 1984, when David lost his farm, Sarah had watched the pattern 3 times. Debt plus declining income equals foreclosure. Simple math, brutal consequences. She attended all 3 brothers' auctions, not to gloat, to bear witness, to remember. At David's auction in August 1984, Sarah stood in the back and watched his 240 acres sell for $740 per acre. She had $31,000 saved by then. Bid on a small parcel, 40 acres that was split off. Bid $750 per acre. Lost to someone bidding $760. She tried. At Michael's auction in July 1986, Sarah had $48,000 saved. She bid on Michael's buildings, the machine shed and barn, lost to someone with more capital, but she tried. At James's auction in May 1988, Sarah had $58,000 saved, didn't bid. Knew the home place would go for more than she could afford, just stood there and paid respects. When Sarah bought her first 160 acres in September 1987 for $136,000, she felt both triumph and fear. Triumph because she was finally a landowner. Fear because now she had a 9 on 10 monthly payment. If anything went wrong, she could lose what she'd built. Her first winter owning land, 1987-88, she kept a ledger of every expense, tracked costs to the penny, calculated break-even yields constantly. The payment pressure was different from rent. Rent you could walk away from. A mortgage followed you, but owning land also meant equity. By 1990, her 160 acres worth $1,000 per acre gave her $160,000 in gross value against $68,000 in debt. She had $92,000 in equity. That was power. When Michael's 240 acres came available in 1992, Sarah saw it as fate. This was land her father had farmed, land that should have stayed in the family, now available because Michael had lost it to debt. She paid $1,050 per acre, $252,000, higher payment, but now she owned 400 acres of the 720 acres her father had assembled, 2/3 of his empire. Her brothers heard about her purchases. They had mixed reactions. David called from Des Moines in 1993. Sarah, I heard you bought Michael's old place. He paused. That's good. Dad would be proud. Or maybe confused, I don't know, but you're doing what we couldn't. Michael never called. He knew she'd bought his lost land. Too painful to discuss. James called in 2001 when Sarah bought his former 240 acres. Sarah, you now own almost everything Dad left us, all 640 acres. How does that feel? Feels like I proved something, Sarah said. Don't know what exactly, but something. You proved we were idiots and you were smart. You weren't idiots. You were unlucky with timing. Debt and bad timing kills farms. I just avoided debt and got lucky with timing when I bought. But it wasn't luck. It was patience. Saving through the 80s when everyone else was failing. Having cash when land was cheap. That's not luck. That's planning. By 2005, Sarah was 70, owned 640 acres, had about $285,000 in debt against land worth $1,220,000, net worth $1,635,000. She could have retired then, but she loved farming, loved the work, loved the independence, kept going. In 2010, at age 74, she finally admitted her body was slowing down. The physical work was getting harder. She hired help for planting and harvest, paid a neighbor to do the heavy work. She handled management and marketing. By 2015, at 79, she knew retirement was close. 3 more years, finish at 82. Seemed like a good number. She farmed her last crop in 2017. Harvested in October at age 81. That winter she prepared to sell. Listed the 640 acres in February 2018. Multiple offers came in. She took the best, $4,200 per acre from a young farmer expanding his operation. Total sale, $2,688,000. After debt payoff and taxes, netted $2.1 million. 43 years after inheriting a $3,500 tractor, Sarah retired with $2.1 million. Her brothers, who inherited $240,000 each in land. Combined, they probably died with less than $50,000 in total assets. The lesson was brutal but clear. Inheriting wealth without wisdom to preserve it is worse than inheriting nothing and learning to build. Sarah, at age 88 in 2024, sometimes thinks about that will reading in July 1975. Remembers the shock of getting just the tractor. Remembers feeling cheated. "Best thing Dad ever did for me," she told a reporter from Farm Journal in 2022. "If he'd left me land, I might have made the same mistakes my brothers did. Borrowed against it, spent the equity, lost it in the crisis. The tractor forced me to be smart, forced me to be disciplined, forced me to build instead of spend. I resented him for years. Now I'm grateful." 3 brothers split the farm, 240 acres each, $720,000 in total value, inherited free and clear. The daughter got a $3,500 tractor. By 2024, only the daughter still owns land. Only she built lasting wealth. Only she proved that starting with nothing and wisdom beats starting with everything and complacency. Sometimes the unfair inheritance is the fair teacher.